Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway.
Welcome back to Paris History Avec Hemingway, and today we're talking about the Beaux-Arts area of Saint-Germain. And I know nothing about this, so once again, Claudine is going to teach us a lot today.
Well, Saint-Germain is probably one of the most popular areas to go to in Paris, but this is kind of a little area within Saint-Germain because every single arrondissement has different quarters in it. There's 4 different quarters in every one, but most people don't know. Even if you live there, you don't even know, but there's a few famous ones like Odeon that people know by name. But the area that is over from Boulevard Saint-Germain that goes down towards the Seine is kind of known as a Beaux-Arts section because that is where the school is. And that is the art school that dates back quite a long time that has featured just about every amazing artist in French history.
Oh, there we go.
There we are. So we're going to start down on Boulevard Saint-Germain. And it's the very, very large block that is on one side of it is the Café de Flore. If you go all the way down to the end of it, it is a Rue Saint-Père. And right there on the corner is a tiny little park that's called the Square Terra Cheveco. It sits where the former church was of the Saint-Père and cemetery. So there was a cemetery there. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about the catacombs. This is one of those cemeteries that actually fed into the catacombs that they had picked up all those graves, took all those bodies and tossed them into this little tourist attraction, which kind of still grosses me out. But it was a cemetery there from 1259 to 1544, and it was basically where they buried many of the lepers and the plague victims. But the square itself is named after the Ukrainian painter Taras Shevchenko. He was also a poet. There is a bust of him on the column there inside the little garden, and right next to it is the Ukrainian church, which last winter I ended up walking in there. It was before everything started happening in Ukraine, and since then I've gone in there, and they always have a place that people could donate money and donate coats and donate clothing and anything that they could send to the Ukraine. It's a very small church. It's a really pretty little church. It has a lot of kind of more of what you would think of like the golden Greek Orthodox look of a church, but it's really sweet to walk in there. Right in the garden itself is also another bust, and it is dedicated to a doctor that's name was René Léonot. He was a doctor who studied at the Hospital de la Charité, and he ended up being the one that invented the stethoscope.
Ah, that's so cool.
So every time you go to the doctor, you can now say, oh, that is by, I know who created that. They probably have no idea what you're talking about. But he basically came up with the idea because he was walking through the courtyard that is in front of the Louvre, which was once filled with homes. And a kid broke a hollow beam that he put up to his ear, and the kids were playing and laughing because the sound, when he put it up to his ear, the sound was louder and it echoed. So when he asked the kids what they were doing, and they told him, he got the idea of like, oh, well, if you put that up against, you could get the magnifying sound of these things, and thus the stethoscope was born.
That's so wild. I didn't know it came from France.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. But there's a little bust for him there. There's also one that is for French sculptor Henri, who ended up doing a lot of stuff, and then also was a part of the Free French Forces. So he was a big part of the against World War II and against the Nazis' occupation.
Oh yeah, we like that.
So it's this teeny tiny little park that's right there, and has all of these great little things. This is why anytime you go to Paris, always walk into these little parks. There's usually green signs on the gates, and it'll say the name of the park. And sometimes it's all in French, but sometimes they'll have information in there. It'll say maybe, who, the statue is, or who the person that the park is named after. So I always love finding things like that. And we get entire podcast episodes from some of that stuff I find, because I always am like, who is this person? And then go down a rabbit hole, and then we have to share their story because it's so cool.
It's better than watching cat videos. You're inspired by other things.
There you go. But we'll head down Boulevard Saint-Germain, and we're going to walk past Café de Flore and Du Magot. And we've done episodes about specifically about those historic cafes. So we'll link those on my website. But it's, of course, a very popular area. It is back to being incredibly busy. Both of them usually have a line to get a seat at, especially for lunch or dinner. Usually if you go early in the morning, you could easily get a spot to sit for breakfast. But if you have to go later in the day and you want to go for lunch, it's back to being quite busy. I don't even honestly remember lines there before COVID. But I probably wasn't really paying attention, but it is interesting because you see just these big lines of people. And of course they want to have the perfect seat sit out, outside. If you went inside, you probably have no problem, but those are those places that you want to take all your Instagram photos and then, see and be seen.
Yeah, see and be seen. I like that.
Yeah. So if you take a left right there, you on your right hand side is the beautiful Église Saint-Germain-des-Prés. And this street is Rue Bonaparte. Right there on the other corner is of the big three, which is, I always say, is Du Magot, Flore, and Brasserie Libre. My favorite one is actually just around the corner. It's on that corner of Rue Bonaparte, and it's Le Bonaparte. I think it has the greatest view. If you sit there on a sunny afternoon and have lunch, you're looking up at the Tower of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is, goes back to like the 11th century. It's just a really beautiful little spot to sit, especially in the afternoon, to get some sunshine on your face. But it's a really great little spot. And that street that goes to the left, on the right side of that goes along the church, is the Rue de l'Abbé. It was created in 1800 after the church and abbey had become national property. The building was destroyed, demolished, and some of the pieces of the former abbey are there in that little square. And that's the Square Laurent Prade. And I love that little one. And anytime I take people around Saint-Germain, I always have to tell them about that, because inside there is a bust that was done by Picasso. And it used to be the only time you could really find a Picasso that you could kind of manhandle, put your hands all over it. But now there's a little fence around it, so you can't get enough. But you would never really know it's Picasso, because it doesn't, there was a signature at the very bottom of the base that it sits on, but now there's all this planting around it, so you don't even see that. But he was commissioned because Paris wanted to create a monument to Guillaume Apollinaire, who was a poet, and he was also an art critic, and he was good friends with Picasso. And so they said, hey, do you want to create a monument for your old friend? And so he said, sure. But Picasso, being Picasso, said, he wanted to do it his own way. So he kept putting all of these ideas together and submitting it. And they were like, no, that's crazy. No, that has nothing to do with Apollinaire. Like, no. And so it was sort of 5 years. They tried to get him to do this. He finally got so fed up with it, he just said, here, just take this. And it is the head of Dora Maar, who we've also done a podcast episode about. She was a really interesting artist. And it's just her head. And the only really relation is that Guillaume Apollinaire met her. They knew each other because she was his lover for quite a long time of Picasso. But he really doesn't have anything to do with poor old Apollinaire. And Apollinaire, he died in 1918. He ended up fighting in World War I. He was got hit in his helmet, in his head, with some shrapnel, and it blew like a hole, like a pretty good sized hole out of his helmet, and of course also damaged his head. And I saw the helmet at a exhibit that was at the Musée de l'Armée about Picasso and the war a few years ago. Was fascinating, but he never really fully recovered and just kind of had issues and ended up dying. But he and Picasso were good friends until the Mona Lisa was stolen.
Uh-oh.
And the Mona Lisa was stolen, and Picasso and Apollinaire really knew this guy. They knew this guy that would go into the Louvre and just steal things. And he would just, and this was back when the Louvre had everything. So this wasn't when, that you didn't have the Orsay with the Impressionists. You didn't have the Quai Branly that had like the really old art that, the indigenous stuff and things like that. And so he would just go in there and steal these little statuettes and then give them to Apollinaire or sell it to Picasso. And, Picasso didn't know where it came from. So Apollinaire thought, oh, I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm going to go to the police and say, hey, I know this guy that steals things from the Louvre. Maybe you should go talk to him. Maybe he took the Mona Lisa. And they went and they thought, oh, well, no, but we should just arrest you. And now we're going to go arrest Picasso. So the two of them ended up getting taken off to jail. Picasso ended up getting out, about 12 hours later, but Apollinaire had to stay for like a week. And Picasso kind of turned his back on him and kind of was like, you're on your own, dude. So obviously kind of didn't do a lot for their friendship. And poor Apollinaire, he ended up eventually getting out. And of course, it wasn't either one of them that stole the Mona Lisa. But poor Apollinaire, at this point, Picasso was, started to become everybody knew who Picasso was, at this point.
I love how they just arrested that guy, that poor guy trying to like be useful.
I know. Yeah. He's just, just stealing things, trying to help out his buddies at the Louvre, which, how much time I spent at the Louvre. I can't even imagine, everything's bolted down. But back then, in the, 1913, I don't think the security was probably what it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good. Don't try it. Don't try to do that.
Love it.
But the little, what I also love about this little park is because it has pieces of that former abbey. So this whole area of Saint-Germain, basically all the way down to the Seine, at one point was owned by the Catholic Church, and it was the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and it basically went all the way up to basically where the edge of Saint-Sulpice is. So it was immense. It was just this whole entire area, and of course now really none of that remains except for the Église Saint-Sulpice and Saint-Germain-des-Prés. But they took pieces of these old buildings, and it's these beautiful, Gothic arches and stuff, and they're in that little park. So again, this is why you got to go into those little parks, because there's fascinating things they have in there, and you would have no idea that some of those things go back to like, the 9th century.
No way.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. But the Abbey, the street that's there, goes right by a wonderful little area, and that is the Rue de Furstenberg. A lot of people call it the Place de Furstenberg, but it's technically not that. It's just the Rue de Furstenberg. It has a little tiny island in the middle of it. It's extremely photographed. You will see, fashion campaign shooting in there. People, have you ever shot people in there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's really beautiful. And of course, because it is right outside, if you have a drink in your hand, take a drink, because I will say his name now, Delacroix. So it is our Delacroix drinking game. It is where Eugène Delacroix lived. He moved there in 1857 until his death in 1863, because he could be close to the Saint-Sulpice church, is where he was painting in the Chapel of the Angels there right inside the door. But later on, Frederic Bazzi and Claude Monet also lived there in 1866. In the 1920s, it was saved from being demolished and turned into a parking garage, but right there in the very front courtyard. But his admirers ended up getting together and raising a bunch of money to save it. They ended up opening it up as a small museum. He had his workshop there that he built in the back courtyard. And if you've been to that museum, the back courtyard is lovely. It's attached to the Louvre. So if you are a member of the Louvre or you have a ticket to the Louvre, you could go with just your ticket. You could go within 24 hours. So you could go the same day or the next day. If it happens to be Tuesday when it's closed, you could go on Wednesday. It's a very small museum. Just show them your Louvre ticket. Gets you right in. If you're a member, you get right in. Sometimes I just go into the courtyard and just sit there, and just like, sometimes I even take my laptop and I'm like, I'm just gonna go sit in the courtyard of Delacroix. But it's really great. He lived there till the end of his life. He moved there so, as I said, he could get closer to Saint-Sulpice. He was there with Jenny Lagoulou, who was his basically his best friend, and she kind of helped take care of him. She was his, maid and everything, and did everything for him, but he left pretty much everything to her. So his art collection and stuff went to Jenny. There is usually a painting of her that's in there that's kind of neat. But after his death, basically they didn't really care. And back then, nobody really, unless you were, when you died, a pretty huge name, and he was a pretty huge name at the time, but they didn't have museums and things, as many as we do now. So these things weren't thoughts at the time. But Marie Denis and Paul Signac in 1928 formed the Society of the Friends of Delacroix to save the building. In the 1930s, they had a yearly exhibition there that Matisse and Edward Viard also helped, and they also helped pressure people to donate money. In 1952, when the home was for sale, they raised enough money to buy it and asked the National Museum to purchase. And in 1956, the state finally agreed to buy the building and incorporate into the national collection. And in 1971, it officially became a museum, which is a very fantastic year for something to happen, especially if it's Delacroix. But it was turned into a very small museum at the time, and it used using his letters and his diaries and everything. They restored it to what it was when he was there. And when you go to the museum, it's small. You go up a very steep flight of stairs. You go in. There's 3 or 4 very small rooms. 3 of them that actually have the art in them. And then you go out the back door into the courtyard, and the back atelier, which he had built, as I said, is where you go in there, and there's other art in there, and they do some exhibitions. They have a pretty large collection, but there's not very much of it on display at any one time because it is small. Lately, they've been doing one room that's having more contemporary things in there, and even students from the Beaux-Arts doing it. And I just wish they would just keep it him, because it's already small enough. Don't give away one room. So I'm kind of hoping that, they uninstalled one and they reinstalled another one. And I'm like, oh, come on. But luckily I'm quite close to it. But in 2004, the Louvre took it over. So that's it's now, part of the Louvre, and they take care of it, and they're linked together. But it's a really fantastic museum. And if you love Delacroix, as I do, it's a great place to pop into and see. And he not only lived there, but he also lived in many of the streets surrounding there too.
No surprises there. And we slipped him in, I think, 4 times this time. I love it.
Yes, I know, and I love it. So when you walk out there, there's the Rue de Furstenberg has a bunch of really great little interior decorating stores as well. This little area right there is also big for that. In January, when they do the Deco Off, which is a big thing, the streets, they ended up having like dance parties on the streets in January. But usually there's trays of champagne being walked around. So just, just pop through the neighborhood and pick up some champagne as you go by. But there's also a really fun store there called Artie Dandy that's right there on the Rue Furstenberg. It's a really cute store. There's also one in the Marais, but they have great stuff, and that's where I got my favorite tennis shoes that say Rive Gauche and Rive Droite on them. But it's a really cute one. I always take people by there to pop in and check it out. But it ends right there at the street. That's Rue Jacob. Rue Jacob is a longer street that ends up turning into the Rue de la Université, which is where our favorite Julia Child once lived. Rue Jacob itself is also where Margaret de Valois, who was the first wife of Henry IV, she set up a palace here. It covered a lot of this area as well. She placed the Augustin Order of the Brothers of Charity there, which she thought would give her a good path to get to God a little quicker, after she died. Inside there was an altar of Jacob. That is why the street is named the Rue Jacob. On that street as well, there is at number 12, there's a little courtyard that's always open. And the trick is, whenever you're in Paris, in any street you walk down, if you see one of those doorways open, walk in. You just pretend like you know where you're going. Some of them are actually open because there's businesses, but you find amazing little things in here, and they're just really beautiful because pretty much, you look at any street in Paris, It just looks like a door, but it usually opens up to an inside where sometimes people are parked, their cars. There's little courtyards, there's trees, there's all sorts of beautiful little things, and you would have no idea. Go to Google Earth and do the aerial satellite, and you can see how many courtyards are just down every single street. But there's a little courtyard there. It's also the Hotel de Saxony, who was a home of the Marshal of Saxony. He was the great grandfather of Georges Sand, who we've talked about before. And he lived there. And right next door, Richard Wagner, the composer, also lived there. And number 20, Tales Fielding, who was an English painter, lived there, as well as Delacroix in 1823. It was also built by the Marshal of Saxony. It was built for his mistress, the actress Adrienne Lecouvreur, who, we always love those one. But number 20, and every single time I walk by this street, which is sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, I am waiting for that door to open, because if you remember when we did that podcast episode about Natalie Barney, she was the one that had those huge salons, but this is the one at this address that inside there was the temple. And remember that one? And she lived in this apartment, but there was a temple in the middle of it. And there is an old legend that there was a tunnel from that temple underneath the Seine to the Louvre.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I have heard my friend John Baxter said that he was told that that was torn down, but I don't know, because I looked on Google Earth and it looks like it's still there. So one of these days, I'm just going to stand outside that door and wait for it to open and sneak in there and see.
Breaking and entering.
But she lived there. Yeah, it was the Temple of Friendship, that it was what it was named. And I'll link all of these. And I love how we could always circle back to all the different ladies we've talked about. But I'm waiting to see that. And at number 28, another lady we talked about, Colette, lived there. She lived there when she first came to Paris, 1893. And that's where she started writing the Claudine books.
That was there. It
was there.
Places.
I know. So she lived a lot of places too. But, there's all sorts of tie-ins here. But we'll walk back down. We'll take a right on Rue Bonaparte. Right there on the corner, you have Ladurée on one corner and Pré aux Clercs on the other corner. Pré aux Clercs was where the Hemingways, when they first came to Paris in 1921, that is where they ate the very first night they were there, at the Pré aux Clercs. And they still have that when you walk in the door. They have this big entrance and it's covered with Hemingway books. So they still hold on to that as much as possible. They don't really tell you why, they don't stand there and tell you. But if you take it right there on Rue Bonaparte, and then you go down to this little this little sweet street called Rue Visconti. It's a street that I love. Just because it's very quiet little street. It doesn't really have any plaques on there to tell you everything that happened there. But it's really great because Renoir lived there, Frederic Bazille lived there, Alfred Sisley lived there, Monet lived there, Delacroix lived there. All of these people, that's where Delacroix lived when he painted the paintings of Chopin. It was Balzac's printing press was also on that street. So all of these amazing little things happen on this little street, but of course there's no signs there. But I'd love to walk down that. It's always quiet. Anytime, as you know, in Montmartre, it's always filled with lots of people, but it's great just to find these little streets, just one street away, to go around a corner and you kind of have it all to yourself. But there is a teeny tiny park there that is never open to the public. I have never seen the gate. The gate is always padlocked shut, but it's the smallest green space in Paris. It's the Jardin Alice Saunier Sautier. It was named after Alice, who was a politician. She was born on April 26th. Again, my birthday, yet another one, 1925. But she was the first woman to be the dean of a university, and she became the minister of universities. In 2017, the garden was renamed after her because she lived at number 5 on that street.
I'm glad that they could remember her with naming.
I know, but it's like the cutest little, it has like a pergola and it's really quiet, but usually sometimes it's like they obviously don't take care of it because sometimes like it's just completely overgrown. But I've never seen it unlocked. So I don't know if you could call it the smallest green space in Paris when nobody could go.
There's a lot of those, actually.
I mean, really, every single some courtyards might have, a 1 foot square patch of grass. Isn't that smaller? But it's not a park.
It's a secret.
But Go down the street, you take a left, you're on the Rue de Seine, and right in front of you at number 31, Mrs. Georges Sand lived there. She lived there in 1831. But then when you turn around and go down, take a left, then you take your next left. That is a Rue des Beaux-Arts. The Rue des Beaux-Arts is another lovely little street. And number 4 was the Hotel de Nice, which is the former boarding house where Jim Morrison first moved into when he came to Paris. And at number 5, the painter Georges Boissier at 14 lived there. He entered the École des Beaux-Arts. And he also studied with William Bouguereau, who was an amazing academic painter at the time. But at number 13, you have the L'Hôtel. It was a former Hotel d'Alsace. It was built in 1828. It is the on the former location of Margaret de Valois' Pavillon d'Amour. But it became now, it's more known because it has it is a spot where Oscar Wilde died. And when he was staying there, it was, a dingy, tiny place that, didn't, he basically, it didn't cost very much. We had no money. They would put dirty notes under his door saying, pay this money or we're going to kick you out. And it was at the end of his life. And this was when any money he did have, he'd to go up to Café du Magot and drink absinthe all night and then stumble, home in the midst of hallucinations. And that is where he died. But now it is a 5-star hotel with only 5 rooms. And it's very, very chic and fancy. It has a Turkish soaking pool downstairs. It has a little bar with extremely expensive cocktails, but it's also where they say, Anthony Bourdain stayed there and it was on his TV show. But Johnny Depp and all these other celebrities stay there because it's so fancy and tiny. But it's a really cute little one to see. And when you walk out the door, you see the École des Beaux-Arts, which is right there. It was founded in 1817 by the Royal Academy of Art. And was during the Revolution is what they used for Alexandre Lenoir. He used that as the place that he stored all the monuments that he was saving that were being destroyed in the Revolution, including all of the tombs from Saint-Denis of the kings and queens. But the École des Beaux-Arts, you could sometimes go in there. Sometimes they have special exhibits that are open to the public, so you could go in there. It's a good chance, even if you're not interested in the exhibit, pop in there so you could wander around and check it out. Out on the outside, the gate is really big. It has a chapel on the side. The chapel is a former chapel that they moved over there to become part of the school. And I just was in there a couple weekends ago because they had it was a special thing going on in Paris with the art schools. So I was able to pop in there and check it out. It's really, really cool. And there's still students today. So there's still Manet and Poisson and all of these guys went there, and there's still students going to school there today.
I mean, what an amazing place to go to school knowing all that history.
Yeah, it is really cool. And, and because of the Beaux-Arts school, that's why so many artists lived in that area. But right around the corner on the Rue Bonaparte, one of the best doors in Paris at number 5 is a Hotel Besson. That is where Manet was born in 1832. And so I love Manet, but the door is blue. It is massive. And the door knockers out of brass are 2 big circles that have snakes and wrapped around it. And it's one of the best ones. At number 3 was the home of Alexandre de Beauharnais, who was married to Josephine, who we still need to do a podcast. We'll probably to do 2 or 3 about her. He was Josephine's first wife. Josephine would then, of course, go on to marry Napoleon. But he was just a total cad, just a jerk. He was killed by guillotine on July 23rd, 1794. And she ended up getting arrested too. But luckily, Robespierre was beheaded and they kind of ended the reign of terror. And Josephine would go on to marry Napoleon.
Just before all that nastiness.
Just before. But the Beaux-Arts school, it's really cool. They're doing more special big exhibits there. I just saw one a few weeks ago that it was all about jewelry and how jewelry, it gets influenced by nature with flowers and trees and everything. And so I need to get that. I need to share that up on my Instagram. But it is a really fascinating place. And I love to go in there and just see all the students, and it must be just insanely just amazing to be able to go and study art where these great masters once were.
I can't even imagine. And you guys can find more information about everything today on ClaudineHemingway.com and follow her Instagram and check out our show notes for more information.
Thanks for listening today, guys. If you're interested in learning more about Claudine, her tours, history, and the beautiful photographs that she posts all over Instagram, tune into her website, claudinehemingway.com.